Hi, Michelle here. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 5 mistakes that new Hoya growers make. Actually, I'm talking about 5 mistakes a lot of people make. Until you get to be a little more experienced with your own plants, it can be hard to know what your plants like and what your plants don't like. And in today's video, I'd like to go ahead and just share a couple of things I learned along the way that helped me in keeping my Hoyas a little happier, a little healthier, and growing a little bit quicker. If you like today's video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That lets me know if you like today's content and if you'd like to see other videos along the same vein. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing to my channel. That lets the word get out to the YouTube universe, especially the plant YouTube universe, that my channel exists and that others might like to see Hoya-related content such as this. And if you'd like to add something to the conversation, please put it in the comment section below. I promise that I will get to reply to your comment. It just may take me a day or two, so just be patient with me. And now we're going to go ahead and start talking about the first idea. And that first idea is to not follow the current trends. Do what fits your needs and your Hoya's needs. And let me go ahead and explain that a little bit by telling you a personal story about me. When I started growing Hoyas back in 2019, I started with soil and perlite. That was my mix. Sometimes I added a little bit of bark in, but at first it was soil and perlite. And at the time, LECA was kind of starting to become big news in the Hoya world. I eventually, after about 6 months to a year, I transferred to LECA. I enjoyed LECA a lot. I actually still have 2 plants in LECA, 2 Hoyas, I should say. And then Pond started overtaking LECA in popularity. And I switched all of my Hoyas from LECA to Pond, which was not a inexpensive nor a easy task to do. This was a chore and a chore. But I did enjoy my experience with LECA, and I still do. I have quite a few plants that are still in LECA. I began to notice that when my Hoyas got to a certain size, or when they needed to be potted up into a larger pot, that the drawbacks of Pond became evident to me, in the fact that there was root dieback, there was plant setback. I even lost roots when uppotting plants, Hoyas, from a smaller pot in Pond to a larger pot in Pond. And I found out that I was not alone in this at all. In fact, Miro from Basie Plants was the first person, I think in 2022 or 2023, that started talking about this in his videos. And it rang a bell in my ear because I was like, that's what's going on with me. I was wondering why my Hoyas were not doing well as they got larger. They had kind of a plateau and then a setback. And I thought it was me. And Miro came along and said, no, this is Pond. This is a Pond issue. I'm moving all my plants back to an organic mix. And I watched him do that for quite a while. And it became apparent to me in my collection that I might want to do that as well. It became apparent to me that Pond was good for me for smaller Hoyas until they reached a certain point. So if I wanted to use Pond with certain Hoyas, I could. But if I wanted to use them for Hoyas that got to a certain size or larger, it probably would not be the best choice for me for how I was growing my Hoyas. So I decided to go back to what I originally did with some modifications. I don't use soil now. I use tree fern fiber, which was not available in 2019. I use orchiata bark, which I didn't use in 2019. I even mix in some sphagnum moss, which I had in 2019, obviously, but I didn't use in my mix in 2019. I use self-watering pots now, which I did not use in 2019. I used regular pots with my soil mixtures. So I have made modifications, but I'm going back to, I guess you could say I'm going back to my roots. So I guess the point of that very long story is use what fits your needs best. Use what you feel most comfortable with. If you need to follow the trends, adapt them to what fits you best. Use the trends to what suits you, but don't feel you have to ride that wave. That's my first tip. My second tip is to avoid overwatering, but don't underwater either. As new Hoya growers or as new plant parents, sometimes we can be helicopter parents, and we can water every time the soil gets a little dry at the very top. With Hoyas, if you are in an organic mixture, you want the Hoya to dry out till you stick your finger and at the center of the root ball, it's barely moist. But if you've heard the adage that use the taco test, squeeze the leaf, and if it bends, it's ready to be watered, that's not correct. If the leaf gets that bendable, that dehydrated, you're looking at root rot by that point, and the plant is probably way too long past being underwatered, that you've probably come to a point where the plant needs additional help other than watering. Also, if you've heard someone say, don't water your Hoya until it's absolutely dried out, that's not true. Hoyas grow in tropical rainforests, where it rains almost every day. They grow on trees, though, and on sides of rocks and on craggy surfaces. So they dry out between the waterings, but they are always being watered. So please don't underwater either. You want to have a mixture that is kept damp but is airy. So the roots have air on the roots. You do not want to have a peat-based soil with no to little perlite. If you use peat-based soil only, mix in at least 50% perlite. Add some small bark to the mix. That would be a great mix. How much of the ratio depends upon your Hoya. Some like a Polynura require it to be a little more damp. Some like, I don't know, a Carnosa like it a little drier. You will get to learn that as you learn your plants, but there's a wealth of information on the internet as to how wet or how dry a particular Hoya likes it. But do not overwater it where you're watering it constantly. If you feel that you need to keep a plant consistently watered, try looking into self-watering pots where you keep a reservoir consistently. You have a wick that goes from the net pot where the plant is kept into a wet reservoir where you keep the water in. You only have to water it when the reservoir is completely dried out for a couple of days. Then you fill the reservoir up and then the plant is happy again. But as for underwatering, just make sure you water them. When they dry out, water them again. Try not to underwater, try not to overwater, try to get it just right, like Goldilocks. So that is my second mistake to avoid when you are new to growing Hoya. My third mistake that a lot of people do is don't check on the roots enough. And this is, I know that a lot of people are hesitant to check the roots of a plant because they think you're up potting the plant, you're stressing the plant out. No, don't do it. But Hoya roots are a little different. Hoya roots get two kinds of rot. They get traditional rot and they get dry rot. You can rot the roots on a Hoya from leaving it get too dry. You need to check on the roots if you notice the leaves get too bendy, too flexible, too thin, or if they are getting yellow, if they are dropping off, if they're getting brown. These are signs that you need to check the roots, either for traditional rot or dry rot. What you want to look for, roots that are rotted on Hoyas do not look like roots that are rotted on other tropical houseplants. Roots that are rotted will still be white to yellow to light brown, even dark brown if you have them in a soil mixture. That's perfectly normal. They will not be black unless you have them in some massively dark soil mixture. They will, if they are wet rotted, they will sometimes appear translucent. They will, if you gently pull on them, they will either pull away with your hand, like they will pull away like a wet noodle, or they will break off. Breaking off is dry rot, pulling away is wet rot. When the roots pull away, as in wet rot or dry rot, you need to cut the root until it is healthy. Sometimes this means cutting off most of the roots or all the roots. It is better to cut off a root than leave it on, potentially being bad. Hoyas are made to be rerooted. Hoyas, it is not well known, but I read about it a few months ago, that it is traditional for botanists to restart their Hoyas every 3 to 4 to 5 years. They just take a cutting, toss the plant, and restart it. So if that's what experts do, then that's safe for us to do as well. You can chop off all of the roots and reroot a cutting. If you have to lose the bottom leaves and you cut it off at the next node, you can reroot that Hoya. Again, if you are not aware, Hoyas will root anywhere from the stem. They will push roots out anywhere on that stem. They do not need a node. So any healthy root will root. Any healthy stem will root. So don't worry about if you lose a couple of leaves because the stem is not healthy or anything like that. Cut all the roots off right down to the stem, reroot it. You can reroot in water, you can reroot in soil, you can reroot in pond, you can reroot in perlite, you can reroot in anything. I personally like to reroot. I like to stick the cutting in literally the same substrate I'm going to grow it in. Why? Because it gets used to that substrate and it's not going to have to grow new roots that are adjusted to that particular substrate in order to survive. So if I am growing in a organic substrate mixture, I plant those cuttings and grow the roots in that particular substrate mixture. That way I'm not transferring from water roots to soil. Sometimes that works really well. I found that sometimes I don't transfer cuttings from soil, from water to soil very well. That's just a personal thing I do. I tend to not keep the soil or the organic mixture wet enough, because after you transfer from water to soil, you need to keep that organic mix wet for the next couple of weeks to let it transfer appropriately. So that's just a personal preference. But back to the roots. That is what you need to do. If you take off all the roots, it will regrow. It is easier and better to cut off weak roots and regrow strong roots than to try and save some crappy roots, pardon my language, and try to regrow roots from that point on, because it's not going to be as viable and as healthy of a plant. So that's the third common mistake new Hoya growers make, is not checking on the roots enough. You don't have to check on them every week, but if you see a problem in the leaves, definitely the first thing you should think about after thinking, did I water, did I fertilize, is checking the roots. The fourth mistake that I see commonly in new Hoya growers is not learning how to propagate all types of Hoyas. And what I mean by that is you need to learn to propagate thin-stemmed Hoyas, woody stem Hoyas, soft stem Hoyas. You need to learn to propagate, tiny leaved Hoyas. You need to learn to propagate successfully all types of Hoyas in different propagation methods, because for several reasons. First of all, you may need to take emergency cuttings. If you have a plant that's going downhill and going downhill rapidly, you need to be able to take cuttings that are still healthy off the plant and pot them up, propagate them separately from the plant. That way, if the main plant dies, you have a healthy part of that plant ready to go. So that's the first reason. The second reason is you want to make more of the plant, be it for personal use, be it to give to someone, be it to sell. That's the main reasons. So, it takes some effort to learn how to propagate the different types of Hoyas, because a woody stem Hoya is going to have a lot different requirements than a thin leafed Hoya with a thin stem. A pencil thin stem is going to have a different requirement for rooting than a thick, soft stem, such as, there's a difference between a Hushkiliana and a Griffithii. Both of them are soft-stemmed Hoyas, but one is pencil thin, and one is pretty thick. So, get your experience down and definitely get used to different methods. Water propagating, perlite, soil, pond. Get used to different methods so that way you have that in your pocketbook of tricks. If you need to, transfer cuttings or propagations from one method to another, because there's going to be times where your main method is not going to work for you, and you're going to need to switch to another method, and you want to make sure that that cutting stays viable. So that is my fourth listed common mistake that people can make when they're new to Hoyas. And my last mistake is definitely one that not just new Hoya growers make. This is one that a lot of people do, and that is not potting up a size soon enough or often enough. It can be a misconception that Hoyas need to be kept in the smallest pot possible and as root bound as possible. And that is not true to some extent, to the most part, I would say personally. I have found that Hoya do like to be in a smaller pot for their size, but they do not like to be extremely root bound. They do like to be potted in a larger pot, and they do just fine if they are in a large pot for their size. I'm going to shout out Planted in Rhode Island here because he likes to transfer his cuttings, very small cuttings, into 4-inch pots. And they do perfectly fine, if not fantastic, in those pots. And if he can do that, you can put your cutting in a 2.5 to 3-inch pot and you will do just fine. Up potting a Hoya is not should not be a traumatic experience for a Hoya. It should be a time for that Hoya to take a pause, but then really start to advance in its growing. Like I said in the first step, pon can cause root dieback when it's up potted to a larger pot size. But beyond that, if you're using an organic substrate or if your Hoya does not have root dieback, it should just take off after getting into that larger pot size. After a short acclimation phase, it should really take off after going into a new pot. You should not keep a Hoya in a little plastic Dixie cup until it's got 18 leaves on it. Please don't. You will notice more growth, more rapid growth when you pot them in a little bit of a larger pot. You don't have to stick all your Hoya in 5 or 6-inch pots. But I will tell you that if you put your Hoya in 4-inch pots when you think you may want to keep them in smaller pots, you may be surprised at what happens to them. You may be pleasantly surprised at what happens to them. So there are my 5 common mistakes that new Hoya growers make, and sometimes not so new Hoya growers. I personally make those mistakes still, and this is year 6 for me. So I still consider myself a new Hoya grower. I am in no means advanced or even intermediate yet. I still see people all the time that really just blow me out of the water in terms of knowledge and experience. So I just want to share this experience with you. And hopefully, maybe someday you'll be sharing this experience with someone else. And that's all we can do is just share our experience. I really appreciate you staying with me until the end of the video. If you want to put a comment down below, what is one tip you would give someone that is new to Hoyas? What is one, maybe a unexpected idea that you would have to share with someone that you don't think is shared often enough? Please put it in the comment section below. I really appreciate you staying with me until the end. I know that your time is valuable and that there are other things that you could do with your time today. So thanks so much for spending it with me. Have a wonderful day. And until next time, I'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.